Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today a new session focusing on security inside Microsoft Azure as well, hybrid security. But before we start, I'd like to give you a short introduction about me. My name is Lagler-Gruener. I'm a lead cloud architect in one of the biggest consulting companies in Austria named ACP IT Solutions. I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP since 3 years and I'm really happy about this. And the reason to get an MVP is to work with the community, to share content. And that's the reason why I have a lot of different social media channels like X. So you can find me on X, you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Xing. I also have my private YouTube channel. I also have my private GitHub repositories where you can find different source codes, different solutions, and also the PowerPoint presentation from all of my YouTube videos. I also have a private blog called cloudblogger.at, and you can see I have a lot of certifications. I have a lot of certifications for Microsoft Azure, and this is also my focus topic, but I also have some certification on other hyperscaler like AWS or GCP. But enough from my side, let's go ahead and talk about the session from today. Today we are talking about, Sentinel triggers and how to use. This is from video type Nugget. And it will be a category from video category level 300. So we will cover a short theory section in the next up to 10 minutes. And then we hand over to a live demo where we go a little bit deeper inside the techniques inside the automation and the trigger, how you can use it. Okay, so the agenda from today is the following. First of all, we will cover SOA in Microsoft Sentinel. Why it's so important when you have a CM solution also to go to the next step and implement SOA in Microsoft Sentinel. Then we talk about the different trigger types and when to use it. So we have 3 different trigger types, and the use case for each trigger type is another one. And at the end, we hand over to a live demo inside my demo environment. First of all, SOA in Microsoft Sentinel. SOA, security orchestration, automation and response, is a really important topic. So when you think about your environment, you have an incident, and for example, the incident includes a VM with a virus, so that you get a detection from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and you want to isolate the VM. So in this use case, we have different topics, we have different options. Go to the Defender portal and isolate the VM. Or the better way is to use Microsoft Sentinel and also the triggers, the SOA option what you have. It's really cool. It's really easy to implement, and I will also cover this in my live demo later on. So we have 3 technologies. The first is security orchestration and automation. The next one is security incident response platforms, and the third one is threat intelligence platform named. And today we will cover only security orchestration and automation. This is really important from the today topic. So when we go ahead, what kind of trigger types are available inside Microsoft Sentinel? So we have 3 trigger types. The first one is an incident-based trigger. The second one is the new entity-based trigger. And the third one is the oldest one and is also deprecated in March 2026. So really important, don't use this trigger. So when you at the moment using this trigger, think about the migration process to the new incident-based trigger or maybe to the entity-based trigger. So alert-based trigger are deprecated in March 2026. It's really important to migrate to one of the upper one trigger, incident-based or entity-based trigger. So we will cover now the first two ones, so incident and entity-based trigger, when we use these trigger types. So first of all, the incident-based trigger. So this is the most common, the most recommended trigger type for the most incidents, because you can execute it automatically over automation rules. So it's really important to know you can execute automation-based trigger or incident-based trigger over automation rules. And you have three different types, three different automation rule types, where you can, when you can execute an automation playbook. The first one is when an incident is created. So this is the most common one. The next one is when an incident was updated. For example, if you assign an incident to another user to define a new owner for an incident, you want to send an email automatically to the SOC team, for example. Or when an alert is created, when an incident is created and a new alert is assigned to the incident, then you also have the ability to execute an automation rule. The second one that you have is the entity-based trigger. An entity-based trigger it's really important. You cannot execute entity-based trigger over automation rules. So this trigger type is the common use case if you have an incident and you want to execute a playbook for exactly this entity type. For example, and user account is logged in, and user account is logged in over an Tor browser, so you have an anonymous IP address login, and you want to deactivate exactly this user account. So you have now the ability to execute an incident-based trigger automatically. The problem here is if you have more entity from account type, which account should be deactivated. In this case, it's the better way to define an entity-based trigger and say, hey, I want to execute exactly this playbook for this entity, not for another entity inside the incident. I want to execute it exactly for this entity. And you have here five different entity types which you can cover at the moment. The first one is IP entity type, the second one is host entity type, then account, URL, and file hash based entity type. Yeah, that are the two main trigger types, and that's also from my theory section. We now hand over to my live demo, and in the live demo, I want to give you an overview about trigger types, the two trigger types, so entity-based trigger and incident-based trigger. Then I want to show you how you can create automation rules and place incident-based trigger inside automation rules. Then I want to show you different use cases to execute entity-based trigger. And at the end, I want to give you an overview about a playbook structure, how you can define different trigger types, as well how you can work with the information from the different trigger types. So let's hand over to my live demo. Okay, here we are. You can see I'm now in my live demo environment. I've opened Microsoft Sentinel, and you can see here in my environment we have two instances which are assigned to my user account, to my admin account. Okay, these two incidents have a status new, and it's from different platforms, from Microsoft Defender for Endpoint and Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, with different titles, with different incidents indeed. Okay, first of all, I want to give you an overview about the trigger types. So when we go to the Azure automation section on the left side, you can see here we have automation rules and we have playbooks. And first of all, we want to cover the different trigger types which are available inside for Microsoft Sentinel. So let's go to the active playbooks, and you can see here different triggered kinds. So a playbook itself, the automation process or the SOA components in Microsoft Sentinel is named playbooks. And playbooks at the end are logic apps. And logic apps is not only for Microsoft Sentinel, so you can do everything with logic apps. And that's the reason why we have also here other trigger types. So in this case, the playbook have maybe a trigger type, an HTTP trigger type, or in this case, a Microsoft Defender for Cloud trigger type. And all trigger types which are not representing Microsoft Sentinel triggers displayed as other trigger types. But in our use case, or in our case, it's really interesting to see Microsoft Sentinel trigger types. And the first thing here, or the first trigger type, is a Microsoft Sentinel incident-based trigger type. So I'm sorry, it's really hard to explain. This is the most common one. So this is the trigger type when you want to automate your incidents over automation rules. The second one here is Microsoft Sentinel entity-based trigger type. So this is currently in a preview state, but we are using this trigger type also in productive environment. So we are I hope in the next time the trigger type is in GA and it's officially supported from Microsoft. In this case, we have 5 trigger types, and I've seen, okay, we have not 5 trigger types, we have a new one. The new one is DNS based, but we will cover this in a few minutes. And the oldest one is here Microsoft Sentinel alert based trigger type. This is the old one. This is the trigger type which is deprecated in 2026. Okay, so that are the 3 different trigger types: Sentinel incident based, Sentinel alert based, the old one, I don't use this, and the entity-based trigger type. So let's go to automation rule. What options do you have with automation rules? Here you can see the option automation rule. Let's create a new one. Create a new automation rule and give it a name. Automation rule send email, for example. So here we have the different trigger types for automation rule: when an incident is created, when an incident is updated, or when an alert is created. In my case, I want to use the alert rule when an incident is created. Here you have different conditions, so you can define one condition, or you can define in the and or state multiple conditions. You have different options here. You can say the incident provider. In my case, in my environment, I have only 2 incident providers. One is Microsoft Sentinel, which represent all analytics rule, all scheduled analytics rule is based from the incident type Microsoft Sentinel. And the second one is Microsoft 365 Defender incident type. I've connected in my environment the new Microsoft 365 Defender connector. And when you do this and when incidents occur, you also have here the ability to select the incident type Microsoft 365 Defender. The second one, what you have here is based on analytics rule name. So in my case, the automation rule is executed for all my incidents, for all analytics rules. You can also filter it down by specified analytics rules if it's not required. In my case, this is okay for me, and I leave it as it is. And then you have here the ability to define your actions. And this is really, really cool. So when we think about the oldest one, the old trigger types, so the alert-based trigger type, you have to fulfill everything inside the playbook. So for example, an incident is created and you want to assign a new tag to the incident. You want to change the status to the incident. You want to assign the incident to another owner. This have to fulfill in the old environment or in the old trigger type over a playbook. And the new world, and it's really, really cool, and I love this functionality really, is you have here the ability to define pre-actions before you want to execute a playbook. The first one is change the status from the original status to another status if it's required. So in this case, when the incident is coming with an status new, and you want to change the status from new to active. So in my case, I want to do this. Then you have the ability to change the severity. The incident is coming with severity low, and you want to upscale the severity to, for example, medium or high. I don't want to use this. The next one is assign to owner. Assign a fixed owner. In my case, I want to assign the incident to me. Then you have the ability to add tags, and it's my recommendation when you execute an automation rule. You want to know, okay, is the execution successful or not? You have the ability for sure to go to the activity logs. Yes, you have the ability, but I want to see it on the incident in one view, and I always use tags to do this and say, hey, the automation rule was done. And then you have the ability, this is also a really cool new feature, to assign tasks. So let's think about what are standard tasks for your SOC team. For example, a new incident has occurred, the customer have to contact, the SOC analyst have to contact the customer, and so on. And in the past, it was a task which have to fulfill from the SOC analyst. And now you have the ability to assign a playbook. Okay, what task have to fulfill? Contact the customer, change the status, assign the incident, and so on and so on. You can assign here a task, for example, contact customer, give it a description, and say always, contact customer, then an incident occurred. Okay. Perfect. And at the end, you have the ability to execute a playbook and think about trigger types. When we are using automation rule-based triggers, an automation rule, we always have to use an incident-based trigger type. And this is the reason why it's really important to have a good naming standard. And our playbooks always starting with incident automation and a random number, and also with the functionality itself. And in my case, I want to execute, or I want to send an email. Okay, click on apply. Everything is now saved, and now the incident automation rule is enabled, and for all new incident, the incident automation rule will be triggered. Assign to the owner, change the tag or add a tag, change the status, and so on and so on. Okay, so that's from this use case. Let's go back to the incident, and I want to show you the manual triggered use case. So you can also trigger incident automation rules manually. Not only incident-based triggers, you can also entity-based trigger. You can also trigger incident-based triggers manually. So let's have a look how we can fulfill this. We have here our incident. This is the incident, and when we go here to the actions and say, hey, I want to execute a playbook, you can see here now all incident-based trigger playbooks, because we are now in the incident view and we want to execute, for example, send email playbook for exactly this incident. That's the ability what you have with a manual triggering. So when you want to manually trigger an incident-based trigger playbook. Okay, so, but now we want to go to the malware incident on an endpoint. So you can see here when we go to the details, we have here our different entities, and when we go to the entity base, you can see all entities. And when we think about entity-based trigger, what kind of trigger types do you have? We have host, we have account, we have IP, we have URL, and we have file hash. We have a new one, we have also a DNS-based trigger type. But in my case, we have here an host. And what we want to do is we want to isolate this VM. We want to isolate in Microsoft Defender for endpoint exactly this VM. And you can see here I'm now connected at the moment. I can write here something, I can ping host name. So you can see AVM Win10 CZ. So I'm able to connect over remote desktop. And when I go here to the entity, and we are using now an entity-based trigger, and click here on Run Playbook, we only can see an entity-based trigger playbook. And in this case, MDC isolate device. I click here on Run. We can see here on the runs, it's executing, it's successful. When I go back to the VM, hopefully we have now, the connection is now broken. So it's we don't have the ability to write anything. So you can see it now, the connection is now really broken. So what happened in the backend, we say, hey, to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, please isolate exactly this VM and drop all connections. So when we go back to the Defender for Endpoint, when we go to the Defender for Endpoint, not go back, go to Defender for Endpoint, hopefully we can see here the task, or it can take some time. Yes, you can see here action SOC, managed service request, and submitted by MDC isolate device. So submitted by, and you can also see here in the action center what's happening in the past, in the backend, and you can see here isolate device was successful. Perfect. Okay, that's the first use case. That's the first use case. Our device is now isolated. And at the end, we also write the information back to the incident. So when we click here on refresh, go to the activity log, you can see here an activity log entry, isolate device is pending. So this representer case is a status. It's at the moment, it's a pending. And what we also do is we send an email to the customer with the information, okay, was successful when everything is done. Perfect. So we have here our email, we have here our activity log information. So let's go back and talk about a second use case. You can see here anonymous IP address involving one user. The alert is coming from Azure Active Directory Identity Protection, which is a component of the new Microsoft 365 connector. So all alerts from Azure Active Directory Identity Protection are transferred exactly over this connector to Microsoft Sentinel. In my use case, in my definition, we can go here to the details, and you can see here I have my entities. When we go to the entities itself, you can see here I have an account-based entity. And now I want to execute the following. I want to disable this user. The problem, what we have here is when we go to Microsoft Entra ID and select the user here, you can see this user is a synchronized user. Account is enabled, and this user is a synchronized user from on-premise. You can see it here. On-premise sync enable, on-premise sync enable, yes. So what I want to do is I want to block this user. We have now the following problem. When we make it really simple and deactivate the user account in Microsoft Entra ID, it's possible. But on the next synchronization process from on-premise, the user will be enabled on Microsoft Entra ID. So we want to fulfill both. We want to disable now in Microsoft Entra ID the user account, as well on-premise in Active Directory. So this cool use case. So let's go to the device, to the entity, click on Run Playbook. We have here a different entity-based trigger. We have one to revoke the user session from Microsoft Entra ID. And we also have here the ability to Entra AEDDS block user account. We want to execute this playbook. When we go here to the refresh, you can see the playbook is now running. In this case, we also implement a new functionality inside the playbook to ask the customer for some requests. So for example, we want to disable this user account and we have to ask the customer, okay, is this request, is this a valid request, or can you approve it or reject it? So how can we handle this? We can handle this over email, for example. This is one way. We get now an email and you can see here we have a request from our SOC team to deactivate this user account. Is this a valid request? Can you approve it or reject it? And we are now go to the approve. We have to approve it once more again. And now the request or the status is going back to the playbook and say, hey, the customer say it's approved. So please disable the user account. When we go back to the playbook, click on refresh. It should take a few seconds to execute the playbook. Here we are. It's now successful. When we go back to Microsoft Entra ID, click on refresh. The account in Microsoft Entra ID should be disabled now. Yes, account is enabled. No. When we go back to the domain controller on premise, you can see here the user account is enabled. When we click on refresh, the account is now disabled. How can we fulfill this? So, and then, I'm sorry, the customer will also get an email. So here you can see the request was successful and the user account was disabled. As well, we add this information also to the activity log to the incident. Here we are, request was successful. So how can we fulfill this? How can we handle this workflow? This is not basic playbook, it's an advanced playbook, so we have to add a lot of things to our playbooks, but let's have a look to the playbook itself. So I go back to my resource group, I'm filtered down to my management. Here we are, here's the automation account resource group. I scroll down to exactly this playbook. You can see here Entra AEDDS block user account and go to the designer. So inside the designer you can see this is a really huge playbook. So we have different options. We are using HTTP triggers to get information from the Crave API. We are using email triggers. We are using Microsoft Sentinel triggers. We are validating the status. We have a lot of variables inside the playbook. So it's really a huge playbook. But the first thing and the really important thing is we have a Microsoft Entra ID group and we have to validate, okay, the request, what we want to execute, is this from resource which have to validate by the customer. So if the device or the user account is not in the group, we always have to redirect or have to send an email to the customer. Okay, please customer, approve the request, and if it's approved, the execution will go on. So we fulfill this with a Crave API request to get all information from the group and validate the information. And here you can see if the customer or if the resource is not in the group, we have to send an approval mail, and when the approval mail was approved, we go ahead and start the action to disable the account on premise as well in Active Directory, Microsoft Entra ID, I'm sorry. And to fulfill the connection to on-premise, to Azure Active Directory domains, to Active Directory, we are using here an automation account. So you can see here we have our playbook, our runbook, and this is a runbook which is blocking the user account in the Active Directory itself. So it's an advanced playbook. It's not so easy to implement, but you can do this with a lot of different connectors. So when we go to the execution process, when we think, before we go to the execution, let's go back to the designer, and I want to show you the trigger type. The different trigger type what you have. So in this case, we have a Microsoft Sentinel entity-based trigger type. This is in preview state at the moment. But when we go here, when we expand the trigger type, you have here the entity type, the different entity types. And we are using now the account-based entity type. You have DNS, file hash, host, IP, and URL. So that's at the moment the entity types what you have. And in this case, we are using here account-based entity type, and this is the reason why you can see only one playbook for the entity-based trigger type. Okay, so let's go back to the execution. When we think about the entity-based trigger type, you get a lot of information from exactly this entity trigger type. You can see here the display name, the DNS domain name, is the account deleted for true or false, and so on and so on. And with exactly this information, you can work at the end. So you can extract the information and work with the information. For example, to extract the user principal name, to disable the user account in Microsoft Entra ID, and as well on-premise, because on-premise you can only work with the user principal name, or better with the SID, so what you prefer. Okay, so that's from my session. I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope you like the session. You learn a lot of functionalities. So the automation options, it's really huge. So when a customer is asking me, what can you automate? What can you automate with playbooks? My answer here is, and this is a really cool answer from my point of view, you can automate everything. So if you can script, if you can connect to the Crave API, so we can do everything inside Microsoft Azure. If we have a connection to on-premise, you can script, you can write PowerShell script. We can nearly automate everything on-premise. So the automation process itself from Logic App is it's easy. So you can define your workflow. You can also troubleshoot your playbooks. You can also implement try and catch functionalities to troubleshoot or to handle exceptions inside your Logic App. So it's really a cool functionality. Please use it. It's really the next step from your SOC environment. If you have any question, please write me a comment or connect to my LinkedIn profile, send me an email, what you prefer. Thank you, have a nice day, and enjoy my next session, which will be recorded hopefully next week. Thank you.